Hey, what's up, Exit the Matrix family? Bob here. Hey, guys, I wanted to do just a quick little talk on religion and maybe perhaps the foundations of the major religions. Um, a lot of this is in light of what's going on in the Middle East right now. Um, it seems like every 6 to 10 years, we have these conflicts arise there, and it drags the rest of the world into it, at least attention and weapons and funding and everything else. And this is the seed of the Holy Lands. We're told this is where Christianity, Judaism, Islam were all founded. And each of those three religions, the faithful of those orders, all believe that their religion is the ultimate truth and the only truth, and that basically the other ones are infidels. I guess there's a little more cooperation of Christians with maybe Judaism, not the other way, but just that way. But a lot of that's because a lot of Christians don't actually understand what's in their book. And I'm not trying to make that sound mean or anything. I'm just being honest. I don't think most of the faithful of any of those three religions actually understands where their teachings came from. So I want to enlighten all of you a little bit. I don't want this to be a long video. I want to try to get it quick to the point. I know a lot of you have said I have a way of kind of carrying on. So Christianity, to start there. Christians that you speak to believe that their book, the Bible, was written in it mostly in its entirety. A lot of them will give at least that, yeah, some books were taken out, some were added later on throughout time, but for the most part, they believe the New Testament was written mostly while Yeshua walked the earth, and that is absolutely wrong. In fact, most of the New Testament Bible was written and compiled between 170 AD and as late as 900 AD. So that's a pretty long time after Yeshua walked the earth. So you're going to probably ask, well, what are you talking about? The disciples were right there with Yeshua writing exactly what he was doing. And this is wrong once again because most of the books about the disciples, Mark, John, and so on, um, those books were written over 100 years after Yeshua was gone. They were not written directly by his disciples. For the most part, you could say that they were oral teachings that were passed down and then put on paper. And that obviously, that how that game plays out, passing information from one person to the next and down through the years. And some cultures are really excellent at keeping the information, close to the truth, close to what it originally was. But you're always going to lose understandings and, you know, words and teachings and inflections and all that. It's always going to be lost over time. Um, but I wish more Christians would actually research that to understand that not only was the New Testament not written while Yeshua was walking the earth, it was written many years after, and it was written by the direction of the Roman Caesar, of the Roman emperor. It was not, you know, his disciples that went and compiled and finished the book right after Yeshua, left the earth. No, this was, over 100 years after, by direction of the Roman emperor in the direction of the Council of Nicaea, which at the time was basically just a group of rich, wealthy, and powerful um, political class and religious class of the time getting together and compiling these books and writing, trying to complete the Bible. And then as the years went on, as you had different reformations in the church, as you had different, popes come and go and have things changed or added to, and different religious, Christian sects that would pop up. They would add and take away, and then you had kings that would want special editions written, and then things would be taken out, added in. So it was an ongoing process to get to the Bible that you now call the complete, unchangeable Word of God, which was actually the Word of man, because mankind completely changed and manipulated those teachings for hundreds of years after Yeshua walked the earth. In fact, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi scriptures that were discovered not too long ago, within the last 100 years, those writings were from the Gnostics, the Essenes, and some of them were followers of Yeshua. And what you'll find in, especially the Nag Hammadi scriptures, you're going to find that there's a lot of contradictions to the Bible. A lot of insights into Yeshua too. I mean, fantastic stories about Yeshua's life and what he did. But you'll also find teachings that he taught that were taken out of the Bible, you could say, or were never allowed into the Bible. Like reincarnation, that was a big one. The Essenes, not the Essenes, but a lot of the people that were working on these writings at the time, this was a teaching, and a lot of in the Nag Hammadi, reincarnation is taught. Another huge one in the Nag Hammadi, the Gnostic writings, is that the Old Testament God, they call him Yaldabaoth. They call him the Demiurge. Basically, he is Satan. He's the ruler of this world, and which is interesting because Yeshua was quoted as telling the synagogue leaders at the time, that your father is the devil, and who were they steadfastly worshiping? It was the Old Testament God. So but the point I'm trying to make is that those books were not written during Yeshua's time on earth. They were written many years after, over 100 years after. And you're putting a lot of faith in man, or a lot of faith in God, I would say, because if you do believe that God's hand was on all that, and that through all those changes and all those things being taken out, added to, that was God's work, then hey, you have some stronger faith than I could ever imagine having. But we're going to move on from Christianity, because I think a lot of you that follow Exit the Matrix on Facebook or on YouTube, you have, at least, even if you are a Christian, you have the understanding that, like, yes, there was manipulation in the scriptures. Yes, books were taken out. Yes, books were added, were written later on. So some of you understand that, and you still have your belief, and that's great. That's fantastic. Hey, I have no issue. You believe whatever you want to believe. And then we'll move on to Judaism, the Old Testament specifically. And we could go into the Torah and all that, but let's just say the Old Testament as a whole. So I can unequivocally tell you that the Old Testament stories were stolen. Once again, The Old Testament was not written in real time. Moses was not writing the Bible. Abraham was not writing the Bible. All of these books in the Old Testament, same thing, written, sometimes thousands of years later than they claim to have been written, or at least where they came from. In fact, the oldest relic that they can even find that even has mention of Yahweh or anything to do with Judaism is close to 1,000 years BC. Now, most of your books in the Old Testament, they were written like anywhere from like as old as like 600, 700 BC up until, the point where Yeshua was walking the earth. They were still writing books and adding to that what we'd consider the Old Testament. The Old Testament, same thing that the New Testament went through. Books taken out, books added to. The Book of Enoch being a major glaring book that was taken out, at least out of the version that most of us know as the Bible. Of course, in Ethiopia, you have some of the more ancient, more unchanged versions of the Old Testament that do include the Book of Enoch and many, many other books that were taken out of the Old Testament. So we're running into the same thing with the Old Testament as we did with the New Testament. Throughout time, books being added, taken away from, as each scribe would work on these ancient scrolls, would copy them, they would make changes and additions and subtractions, and it's all in the hands of mankind. It don't matter if you're a scribe or a priest or whatever, a temple, a Pharisee or whatever. You're a human, and you're working on text, and you're going to make mistakes, or you're going to, if you have the power, you're going to make changes. And that's just the way it is. I mean, once again, if you want to believe that the Old Testament was written as it happened and that it was God directing those writings through men, you could, nowadays they call that channeling. But of course, channeling's witchcraft. I know that the Old Testament would say. But yeah, supposedly these people were channeling this information from God while it happened and writing it down on scrolls and, and such. But yet, the Old Testament is less than 1,000 years old BC, which would be about it's still ancient. That's about 3,000 years to our time. However, there's some major issues that I found. See, I used to believe this. I used to actually, when I was younger, trust me, I studied the Bible front to back, back to front. I was deep in the studies, as deep, more deep than 95% of Christians out there. You call it the meat of the word, not the milk of the word. I was digging in all that, and I used to think wholeheartedly that, hey man, these prophets were writing these books down as the stuff happened. As these things were happening, it was being written down. It was God was, putting his hand on their temple, and they were writing this stuff, and it was flowing right from God right onto the scrolls. Man, I was mistaken. Because what started happening was George Smith, was it late 1800s, early 1900s, was one of the first people to break the codex of the Sumerian cuneiform, and he started translating those tablets. And now we have many hundreds of people on the earth that can translate them. It's still very hard to learn. we even have computer systems now that are doing the translating for the universities. And you can go read them yourself. But what's coming to light is that all of the Old Testament stories, the major stories, were all pilfered from the Sumerian cuneiform tablets. Some from the Akkadian, Babylonian, it don't matter. It was all stolen. And then they took that information and they made it theirs. Some of it was taken from Egypt, from the teachings that the ancient teachings that, go back, tens of thousands of years in Egypt. A lot of that was pilfered from them too. And all these ancient teachings were polished up, were written into their Hebrew text. And they were made the heroes of the story. They were made to have the ultimate truth, to be the chosen of God. Yes, those that wrote this about 3,000 years or less ago. But yet, we look at cuneiform, we're going back roughly 4,000 BC, which would be 6,000 years from this point. Think about the math there. 4,000 minus giving the most stretch you can make, let's say 900 BC. 3,100 years. 3,100 years. The difference between some of the oldest cuneiform tablets and the Hebrew Judean text, faith. Now you tell me, who wrote those stories? You tell me where their book was adopted from. Because here's the thing, the Garden of Eden, the Great Flood, the Tower of Babel, all these stories were in the cuneiform. Oh yes, Noah was in the cuneiform. He goes by a few different names, the Asudra. And in fact, they wrote down a lot more detail about the Garden of Eden, about the Noah's flood, all those stories. The Sumerians, that was the source. That was the source. And the funny thing is, now I've tried to have this talk with religious people, and they're like, well, yeah, that was demons that wrote all that. They knew that God was going to have his prophets, and they were trying to, one up us, and trick us. And so they wrote those first because they knew that eventually in the end times, we would fall for the demons' writing instead of the writings of the prophets of God, the Hebrew prophets. Are you starting to see how ridiculous this is yet? I'm trying to make this as absolutely simple as possible. These ancient tablets were plagiarized. And the people that plagiarized them tried to make it their epic. Imagine that. Imagine that. They tried to take those stories. They changed the names. They changed all the names and tried to make it theirs. I mean, it's insane. Like I said, Noah. His name was never Noah. Ziusudra. Atrahasis. It was never Noah. They changed the names and they made it their stories. And then they parade around saying they're the chosen ones, which is absolutely insane because their text freaking doesn't hold a candle to those ancient tablets that don't rely on scrolls. They were way more advanced. They wrote in clay tablets that last for thousands of years, not on old, sheepskin and goat skin scrolls, that you'll maybe get a few thousand years out of if you're absolutely, you can't even touch the things. They fall apart. They're so brittle. But yeah, we have these tablets that are just, carved into the megalithic structures that are still left too, there in Mesopotamia. And all the way up, as far as now Turkey and, Bulgaria, a lot of these Eastern European countries now, they're finding a lot of the cuneiform and, you know, later versions of it, you know, as far as that far north as that, you know, which is really insane. But that's an ongoing thing that we'll get into later. But anyways, I'm trying to make this simple on you. Look, the Old Testament was copied from the cuneiform tablets, and it even tells you in the Old Testament when this could have happened. Remember the captivity of the tribe of Judah into Babylon? Well, there you go. There's the connection point. When they were captured, and their scribes and their priests that were allowed to live and have some somewhat free roam in Babylon. A lot of them were in the king's, you know, in the king's uh, what do you call it? Sorry, the whatever the palace was. Some of them were kept, you know, were allowed to roam the palace grounds, and it was not uncommon back then when you conquered another land. You would bring in their smartest people, their priests, their seers, prophets, and you know the ones that you know knew how to do had special abilities. A lot of times the kings would allow them to live and would give them free roam in their libraries, and you know they became at the beck and call of that king. You know they even though they were their enemies, they were allowed to live. You know it's that was very common back then. I mean, um, so they had massive libraries in Babylon, and of course pre Babylon, Acadia and Samaria. They had massive libraries where they kept these tablets, and the Judean priests, the Levites, and the scholars, they had access to those tablets, and they must have been furiously, you know, uh, trying to write down that information, or maybe they stole a lot of tablets, or maybe they just tried to like you know memorize these stories and everything. But it is quite obvious that they stole all of those stories, and it's really interesting too because a lot of names were changed in the Old Testament, and a lot of the context was lost, like the whole Garden of Eden situation of Enlil and Enki and Adam and Eve. That whole story is different in the Sumerian than what Genesis has. And there's a reason for that because it was they were trying the Hebrews or the Judeans were trying to follow a single God, one all powerful God. And the problem with the Sumerian tales is that it was about multiple gods, the Anuna gods, the Anunnaki, um, the two brothers warring with each other, directly involved in human affairs, Enki, Ea Enki, and Lil. And so they had to take those two brothers and they had to mush them into one God. And that's a lot of times why in the Old Testament you have a schizophrenic God that is at times caring for his people and just, and at other times homicidal and burn everything and kill everything, you know? And so, anyways, we will move on from that. Now, the last one that I wanted to talk about, Islam. I'm not as studied at Islam, but I have read about the beginnings of Islam and all that, and of course that came later, after the other two faiths. And you know, once again, you know, you have a prophet that's supposedly writing down. Well, actually, he was illiterate, Muhammad, so he had scribes as the ones that were writing everything down. And one thing I will say about Islam, a lot of that was written as it happened. However, once again, I mean, this is in the Middle East, where there's still these ancient stories floating around, and these ancient gods, and they were weaved into more modern times. And so a lot of this is all just, it's the same regurgitation that you got in the Old Testament and the New Testament. And they they were taking stories of the ancient Anuna, and they were making them demons or gods. And in Islam, uh, the moon god, their god's represented by the crescent moon, as you know. Well, there was a deity. Um, I believe he was one of Enlil's sons. Yes, it was one of Enlil's sons. Um, was known as Sin, and eventually as Nanar Sin. Well, Nanar Sin, he was the moon god, and in fact, he became later on he became in opposition of his father Enlil, who is many times viewed as the Yahweh from the Bible. Well, let's just say they had a little falling out when his cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed by his brother Ninurta at the order of his father Enlil. And so there has been an animosity between Judaism and Islam for a long time. And that's because they worship Nanar Sin, and he's in opposition to his father Enlil, Yahweh, who the Judeans worship. So these religions that they fight back and forth, these faiths, these that claim that they speak for God, for the creator of all, most of these faiths are actually stolen stories all the way back from the Sumerians, from the Egyptians. Um, and those deities were just repackaged, renamed, and rewritten into new stories, and claimed as those newer faiths as their heroes, as their prophets, as their gods. And down we go to now, where people would pick up arms against each other over these Anuna gods that are still worshipped to this day, but just under different names and faiths. Because there was a time when these advanced beings, I don't know if they were extraterrestrial or if they were interdimensional, but I do believe that they walked the earth at one time. It's quite obvious that the human avatar was hybridized multiple times. I mean, it's the proofs in our DNA. Our telomeres were tied. Two of them, were two of our. We have two less strands than all other primates on Earth. Our lifespans were shortened. And when you start studying the Sumerian tablets, you realize that those were the beings that were talking about exactly that, what they were doing to humanity, at least to the human avatar, because I do not believe that they are creators of souls, or they strictly dealt with the physical realm and the human avatar in the physical realm. But those are the ones that are worshipped to this day, because back then they used to walk amongst men, and mankind built temples to them. They had their own city states: Inanna, Ishtar, Enlil, Yahweh, Ea Enki, Marduk, Ra, Thoth, Ningizida. And I'm just, these are Egyptian and Sumerian names for these beings. They built civilization all around the world, hence the pyramids all around the world and the megalithic structures. They were far advanced to what humans are now. We've actually de-evolved, which is the opposite of this BS Darwin theory, of evolution. Humans are not getting smarter and stronger and better. We're getting weaker, smaller, and dumber through the years. Now, when we were educating everybody, You know, 1900, early 1900s to, I'd say, maybe the mid to three quarters of the way through. You know, yes, as a whole, humanity was getting smarter, but it wasn't genetics. It was just that, you know, for once humans were being taught math and science and other things, language. Because back then, you know, you go back a couple hundred years and all the way since the beginning, most of humankind was illiterate and totally ignorant, and it was the few in power in religious structure and in political structure that um, ruled it over everybody, and they kept all that information for themselves, and humans were kept in the dark. But now we're in a time when humans choose to get dumber and dumber, you know. um, the more time, you know, kids that spend their whole day on TikTok and stuff, they're literally dumb. They don't know how to do anything. You see kids nowadays, it's like they don't even know how to open a package. They don't know how to do anything. Don't know how to start a lawnmower. They don't. I mean, they're just. It's not their fault, man. I feel bad for them. It infuriates me, if you want to know the truth. But it's a purposeful dumbing down of humanity. And I think what had happened was that we were starting to get too big for our britches again, just like the old Tower of Babel. And humans were starting to figure out that perhaps, you know, those Anuna gods didn't have anything on us. In fact, that we, all of our spirits come from the same source. And they don't want us to know that because they are playing kings, they are playing gods over all of us. And once we all figure out that, hey, we all have, we all come from the same source, we're immortal, and we have power over the quantum field that they've learned to manipulate through us. All of a sudden, their game's over. They have no power over us, and all their religions will crumble, all their lies will crumble. And in one of these days, that time will come. And so, anyways, guys, I love to hear your thoughts on this video, and I appreciate you guys, and I'll talk to you later.